Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. Let's get it going. It's David Summers, and it's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. Here comes the story of wrestling in America as told by the Stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. So now, we step back into the ring, back into time. We get wall-to-wall, treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. All right, so I notice you already got your napkin stuck into the top of your shirt, and you're sitting there with a fork in one hand and a knife in the other. Is that true?
Yeah,
Stubbs?
man, I'm thinking about it. That's for sure.
Ready to make that move for Thanksgiving. All right, so you going to be having the traditional meal?
Yeah, man, I think, we're going to do this. Do it all, a little bit of dressing. Got a 20-pound turkey, and there's not a whole bunch of us, so it's going to be good, man. I'll be putting on a little weight in the next few days.
And catching an extra nap or two, maybe?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that could happen.
That's a cool deal. Is it special for you spending Thanksgiving in a beautiful place like the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee?
Yeah, man. It's been a while. A lot of years I spent down in Florida. So, being back up here is it's really feels like Thanksgiving up here. It's a little cool, but it's not too bad. Got a little rain, but it's pretty. It's gonna be a nice Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's cool. We had a burn ban in the state of Alabama for a few weeks, actually, I think, and they dropped that. We had a soaking that we had been waiting for quite a while. So
yeah, we had a fire here yesterday on I-40, man.
Oh, wow.
At the line, the Tennessee-North Carolina line, which is about 40 miles from us.
Yeah.
But we had a fire there that it burned for a couple of days.
Wow.
We had some rain that put it out, thank goodness.
Yeah, well, that part of it, the burn ban is over for us because we got a gully washer, and man, I thought it was not going to stop a couple of nights ago, but. All right, listen, Stud, let's get this thing underway. Your last Studcast, number 325, was all about Thanksgiving night, 1979. It started with your last match against Sterling Golden, the Georgia Promoters version of the Hulk. That's what Jim Barnett named him. All right, but he started in the business, of course, in the spring of 79 in your Southeastern Gulf Coast territory. He was quickly making appearances in the Southern Territory. So what's going on with that?
Well, he certainly was, Dave. He spent less than 6 months with us when he first started, and we were his first territory they ever worked. And then then he left there and he spent about 3 months in the Memphis territory. And then he left there and went to Georgia, man. So, and then when we were together in Georgia there and I was wrestling that night, he said, I'm on my way to New York. I was thinking, man, you're going to run through all the territories in the country, man, in a real short period of time if you keep this up, But so he was on his way to work for the WWF territory of Vince McMahon Sr.
Yeah, that was a big mistake in the long run, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it was. And I don't think Senior was near as happy with his performances as Junior was. Later on, Junior kind of fell in love with him, but don't think Vince McMahon Sr. was really thrilled with what he saw.
Wow. All right. All right. So then you took us down south to Mobile, Alabama for the second Thanksgiving night show in 1979. Every one of your partners in Southeastern Gulf Coast was there and working for the first time since its inception, except for you. That Mobile show was absolutely huge. I'm talking like 10,000 fans in a territory that was filling up with some really tremendous talent and looking ahead to the future. So I got to ask, why were you not down there with them, Ron? What was going on?
Well, I'd sold my Southeastern Knoxville territory, and basically I was in the process of moving, Dave. And there's a process there, and it takes a little time. I'd been in Knoxville basically since October 1974. By far the longest period of time I had spent anywhere since I became a wrestler. And I'd accumulated some furniture and some quite a few things here and there, and it was my first move basically in 5 years. I'd stayed after the sale longer than I even thought I would, because I wanted to make sure everything was working well for the new Georgia owners before I left, and I wasn't planning on being back maybe ever, and certainly not as a promoter.
That was really pretty decent of you to just kind of stay behind, just to make sure everything went great with the promoter. A lot of folks would have said, boom, you handed me the check, I'm out of here. So anyway, that makes sense, though. So let's turn our attention to this Studcast. The title is called, of this Studcast, Armstrong versus Tanaka, Loser Leaves. So many new wrestlers had arrived on the Gulf Coast in the last 3 weeks. So why was it necessary to let go of either Bob Armstrong or Tora Tanaka? What was happening there?
Well, that's a good question, and actually it wasn't my choice, and it wasn't Rob's choice. He was the booker. Tanaka had contacted me a couple of weeks earlier, and he told me he had an offer from a larger territory that he had never worked in before, and a territory he'd always wanted to go to. And he said he had been with me off and on basically for years, which was true at that point. And he said, Ron, I'll be back. I want to come back. And I think it could have had something to do with all this influx of talent that he was seeing coming. He was maybe a little concerned about what status that was going to put him in. But either way, it wasn't going to hurt either one of us by him going and taking a shot in the territory that he had really wanted to be a part of. And that's the way a lot of guys handle their business. So we had so much going on at this point, man. We had all these tape copies of these TVs from Knoxville, these house show matches, and all these angles from Knoxville that we were about to start using on the Gulf Coast televisions, and that was going to set business on fire. I really felt like, and with almost all of those, and very few of those films actually in those videos were about Tanaka.
Wow. Okay, so I see what you're saying, but because those videos were going to become backstories to some future events that were going to be, angles that you guys were going to be working on in the near future. So I can see that we're about to get into another great Studcast for sure on this one. So before we go any further in this one, at the end of the last one, I just thought of this earlier this morning. You said in this Studcast, we would be discussing some private issues among the stockholders about the future and the next big step for Southeastern Gulf Coast, the newest, I guess you would say, the now newest territory. So can we start with that on the ride today? How are we setting it up?
Yeah, man, I think that's a great place to start. We don't usually talk about this type of thing, and I think listeners will be very interested in this discussion. Basically, it was the first between the 5 owners of the Southeastern Gulf Coast territory that we had. And we were, we were at the end of November 1979. So it was the first time all 5 of us were able to talk to each other at the same time since the company had began operation in March of 1978, almost 2 years earlier. So Robert and Bob and Jimmy and Roy, they all met at Roy Lee's house. They were already all down there in Pensacola. And Roy was the only one of us that had been there since that business had began down there, and he had purchased him home and basically as soon after he got there as he could. And so I was still in Knoxville on a conference call with him, basically. And it was on a Monday, 5 days after almost this 10,000 fans filled that Mobile Municipal Auditorium's main arena, man. So we had just had an all-time best Gulf Coast week at that point. So business was very, very good. And obviously, everybody was in good spirits. So we started off with the present booker, with Rob. Okay, Rob, what are you looking at here? What are we going to be doing in the future? So how are things going? And I basically asked him, where we headed from here, man, and as far as the booking is concerned. So his news was both good and bad. He was disappointed with the Stomper's son. He didn't think that he was as far along as he should have been, and he also was having a little problem with Great Mephisto, Frankie Kane, who was the manager of that Mongolian team that were the champions. So Frankie Kane had never worked with Rob as a booker, and he had a reputation, Frankie, as being somewhat difficult to work with anyway. So it wasn't uncommon for guys with lots of ideas that had been former bookers, but weren't presently booking, and that was Frankie's situation. He had booked for a lot of people. He was a very sharp booker and a very sharp guy, and he had his own ideas, and they had a tendency to believe, the guys like that things should be done differently, more like their thinking rather than the present booker's way of thinking sometimes. So I've never had a problem with Frankie. When he worked for me in Knoxville in 1976, the Great Mephisto, but I'd always been the owner there, and he respected that, and he was also working under his good friend Louis Tillett back in those days in 1976, who was the Knoxville booker, and Louis had just left that territory, this Southeastern territory now, as the booker up there. So Rob was young. Frankie was in his early 40s. And, I could understand how that was a problem, basically kind of for both of them, Rob had all these creative ideas. Frankie had his own ideas. And there was a little bit of a buffer there between the two. And a bad attitude, especially from someone who had been a booker in other places, could quickly become a disaster. I got the perfect example of that, a guy named Bob Root. Right. And I had no intention of ever going in that direction again. So, so I told Rob, I said, I don't have a problem, Rob, if you want to start looking for a replacement for Mephisto, and I said, it's not going to be hard to find somebody, especially since the territory just set a new box office record. So in the case of the Stomper's son, we talked a little bit about that. I knew Archie Goldie, that was the Mongolian Stomper's real name. And I knew that Archie would be the first to say that his son was not getting the job done. And Rob and everybody else agreed Stomper was in no way going to let his son hurt business down there, so that wasn't going to happen. So in about 2 months, this situation with Frankie Kane and the Stomper's son, it basically kind of resolved itself. So the next discussion was about purchasing homes in Pensacola. And we all agreed our future was down there, man, and there was no doubt about it at this point. And that the city of Pensacola itself was absolutely beautiful, man. From the huge bay to the magnificent beach, man. You can't get many prettier places than Pensacola. So, Rob and Bob and Jimmy, they were all living in apartments, and Roy, he'd already bought himself a house. So Bob told us during this discussion that he had never, moved his family out of their home in Marietta, Georgia in the 15 years since he'd been wrestling. And he had, on a few occasions, he told us that he had moved them into apartments with him in some of the territories. He went to Florida, I know. He worked other territories, a little short, different lengths of time. But, he had never brought them to Pensacola yet. So he asked, he said, guys, I want to go back home, and I want to sell my home in Georgia And he says, I'm going to permanently move my family here. But he says, I really kind of need about 3 months at least to get that done. I need to find a home here. I got to get my house sold up there. I got to get moved, all of that. So that wasn't a bad thing to ask. And, and it seemed reasonable to all of us.
Wow. So I bet that had every one of you guys smiling like Cheshire cats, maybe. You had a commitment from one of the best wrestlers in the world that he was going to be there and part of your company for good. To me, that's pretty amazing that you talked to I'm assuming this is just your main guys, about let's all buy homes. That's a big decision, even in 1979.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it's always a big decision, So, and you're right. I couldn't think of anyone I would rather have had be part of my company, part of any wrestling company than Bob Armstrong. And I hadn't even considered none of the other guys that were on the phone either. How wonderful an addition his 3 sons were going to be
exactly
in the next 5 years.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I hadn't even thought about that aspect of it.
Hadn't even thought about that part of it. And like, wow, man, geez, he's not coming just Bob. He's going to bring all these boys that are going to be super talented.
Yeah, he's going to bring the NWA Rookie of the Year, Brad. So Brad alone, I mean, how cool is that? Less than 2 years later, by the way, in 1981, I think is when that happened. But what about the next step for the future of Southeastern that you mentioned? What was that all about?
Well, the Southeastern Gulf Coast Territory basically covered from the Panhandle, all of the Panhandle of Florida, all of the southern half of the state of Alabama. It was an area just slightly larger than the Knoxville territory was, but the main difference between Knoxville and what was going on down there is Knoxville only had one major market, where the Gulf Coast had 3. So for the first time, I brought up my thoughts on the expansion of the territory. Never talked to these guys about it, but I had thought about it for quite a bit. Nick Goulas, who was my grandfather's partner in the Tennessee territory for 40 years. At that point, we're talking about 1979, almost 1980, he was in control of the 3 major cities. Two of those were in Tennessee, Nashville and Chattanooga. And then he had that big house in Birmingham, Alabama, man. Birmingham, great town. So Nick's business was dying at this point in the late 1970s, going into 1980, because he tried to take his son, George Goulas, and make a champion out of it. And George had absolutely no wrestling skill.
I've heard you tell about him before, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It killed his territory. It killed Nick's towns,
Wow.
He pushed his son so hard. So I could almost hear, man, their ears perk up over the phone, because I asked them, I said, what do you guys think if I think something's going to happen with Nick, and he's going to want to sell his 3 major cities. And I said, what if we buy Birmingham and the rest of Alabama from him? And you all think it would be worth it to us? Well, there was a dead silence on the phone, for about 30 seconds. I was like, well, heck, they don't like the idea. And then they all started talking to each other at once, like, oh, man, are you kidding? I said, that'd be good. It was like wild. So there was a little lively discussion there that ended with all of us agreeing that if we could make it happen before the end of 1980, which was just about 1 year away from this conversation, that we were going to not just make an offer, but we were going to own Birmingham. We were going to buy Birmingham and be wrestling in Birmingham in less than a year.
Wow. Obviously the biggest city in the state of Alabama. What a great story, Ron. So I don't think we have ever had a real behind the scenes discussion like that before, like this. So no wonder these Studcasts are so popular everywhere. You make wrestling history so much fun and so interesting as we relive these amazing moments. Speaking of interesting, how about you tell us what was on the next Mobile, Alabama card? I believe you guys were in Expo Hall Wednesday, November 28th, 1979.
Yeah, we were back in the smaller building. We got the bigger one because it was a Thanksgiving night, and we were really lucky to get them to open that building for us on Thanksgiving. A lot of big buildings didn't like to run on Thanksgiving and Christmas those nights. So it was as good or even better than the Thanksgiving night card, that we had been there 6 days earlier in the big building. So again, there was 4 main events on this one, just like there was a Thanksgiving card. The opening match was Roy Lee Welch against another newcomer that was just coming in. I call himself the Super Pro, and he was trying to make a name for himself, obviously off the reputation of the wrestling pro, Leon Baxter. So that's going to be an interesting situation. So, then the big Canadian, Joe Leduc, was facing off against Troy Graham. Then there was a 10-round boxing match. And the week before in the Thanksgiving show in the big building over there, Rob and Jimmy had a really bloody match. So they're coming back in the 10-round boxing match. Norville Austin had captured the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship the week before and was defending that belt in a return championship match against the former champion, Tony Charles. The Southeastern Tag Championship was on the line again as the champions, the Mongolians, managed by the great Mephisto, were going to wrestle against Kevin Sullivan and Jerry Stubbs. This time, this was going to be a no disqualification match because they had kept their belts by getting disqualified in the last time that they had wrestled. And then in the last main event, Bob Armstrong was putting on his belt again against Tanaka. But this time, it was going to be no disqualification, and there must be a winner. And the winner was going to stay, be the champion, and the loser was going to be leaving Southeastern.
Wow. So I think you were right, Stud, about this being just as good a card as the last one. I can't wait to find out what the wrestling pro Leon Baxter is going to think about someone stealing his name. I was such a huge, as a kid, man, this guy, the wrestling pro Leon Baxter, it just seemed like he was a superstar in that Houston County Farm Center back in the day when I was younger. And so anyway, it's amazing that you had him. This is a great place to take our break. Let's do that. And when we return, we're going to find out how the booker was going to get all of that talent in one TV show. Can you believe that? That's coming up next, right here. Want a unique Christmas gift for yourself or someone else? Ron's fantastic novel, Brutus, has taken the world by storm. It has 62 reviews and a 4.5 rating out of a possible 5. Check it out for yourself at Amazon novel Brutus. Read the awesome reviews, many of which compare it to Jaws. You've never read anything like this. Get it now on Ron's website, tnstud.com. Click Stud Store. It's only $19.99 for the book only, or $29.99 for the personally autographed copy. Free shipping to whoever you wish. This is a once-in-a-lifetime Christmas gift that will be a keepsake forever. Order now, get it in less than 2 weeks. Bring Brutus home for Christmas. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back in. It's the second half of this Studcast, already off to a great start. Okay, Ron, so another mega card filled with great wrestlers. How did your brother put this TV show together to get as many guys on it as possible? How did he pull this off?
Well, it was the last week in November. The month-long rating period for TV stations all across the country. The Arbitron and the Nielsen book was going on, and that's how everybody that owned these television stations found out exactly how many people were watching their programs and which ones in particular they were watching. And so it was a critical time for wrestling owners to boost their audiences with great TV shows. If they were ever going to do things special, they wanted to do it during these 4 rating book periods every year. And so it was, it was really important, these television shows. And it's like you said, this one is packed. It's got so many great wrestlers on it. Yeah. How you going to get them all on there?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And I'm going to be curious because you put so much emphasis in the right days at the right time on the Arbitron and Nielsen rating books in Knoxville with incredible figures like 80% of the entire market that were tuned into your show. So I'm going to be curious how that will transcend as you move into Southeastern down in Southeast Alabama and in the Florida and Alabama territories. All right, so I've counted the total number of wrestlers and managers on this week's card, Stud. So I believe there are 15, if I counted it right. So I'm going to try and keep up with just how many of these 15 are actually on the TV show.
Oh, you're serious? You're going to see how many people, how many wrestlers on this card are going to end up on this TV. So that's an interesting idea, Dave. I like that. So obviously the more faces you can get in front of these fans sitting at home, the bigger the impact that it makes for your company.
Yeah.
And this show ended up with the new United States junior heavyweight champion, Norvell Austin. It opened up with Austin at the set with Charlie Platt. He had just won the U.S. junior title from the great Tony Charles. And at the end of last week's show, Charlie announced that the United States junior title was going to be defended on this show. Well, Tony Charles was the champion when he announced that. Well, now Norvell Austin is the champion. So Norvell, having just won the belt, he was like, wait a minute, I just won the belt 2 days ago, and I'm going to have to defend it on TV today, right? Because that's not right, So Charlie says, "Hey, well, that's what we advertised last week. You are the champion, and you've got to fulfill your commitment." So Charlie announced that they would be showing exactly how Norvell Austin won the belt in this show's personality profile. Was going to be with both Norvell Austin and Jimmy Golden. So as Norvell left the set unhappily, the studio exploded because here came Bob Armstrong. He appeared out of the studio dressing room, which was right there at the main dressing room. The dressing rooms were just off the main studio. So he popped out of the studio. He's got his belt on. He's bandaged up, man, because the Thanksgiving night, he and Tanaka had a brutal match, man. Both of them were really, really bloody. So he's wearing his belt, but he's heavily bandaged, and he goes to the set with Charlie. So he and Charlie watched, like I said, a brutal match on Thanksgiving night with almost 10,000 fans, 9,700 fans to watch Bob and Tanaka, and both of them ended up bleeding badly, and both of them got disqualified. So this upcoming match between the two of them was a no DQ match in which there had to be a winner, and the man that won is going to be the Southeastern champion, and the loser was going to be leaving Southeastern. So Bob was, he was very forthcoming. He said this is an extremely important match. Maybe as important as any as I've ever been in, he told Charlie, And he says, I'm not planning on leaving this part of the country, man. So I don't care how bloody it gets. Well, I'm not going to be the one with that doesn't have his hand raised.
Wow. All right. So how about the first TV match? Who was on that one?
Well, there was Bob's opponent, man, and Tor Tanaka. And when he came out of his dressing room, he's all bandaged up too, man. So, and Rob told me later, because I wasn't there, Rob discussed this match with me and all the TV. And he said Charlie asked Bob if he'd like to stay at the set with him and, make some comments about, his opponent here. And Rob said, Bob declined. He said, he told Charlie, he said, I'd love to, Charlie, but I'm not going to take any chances of getting hurt between now and this championship loser leaves match, and he says the injury now might cause me to lose that extremely important match, and he finished by saying, in fact, he goes, I'm not taking any chances. I'm leaving the station immediately, right? And he got up from the set and he left the building. So it was started off pretty different in that respect. I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard a wrestler say that before, but it sure makes a lot of sense to me. But so, how did Tanaka do in the matches that followed?
Well, Rob
In the
said,
match.
and I asked Rob that question. I said, well, how did Tanaka do? What was his state of mind? And he said he was just as focused as Bob. He said he attacked his opponent. He said he made quick work out of him, man. Took no time nor chances of being hurt. He said it just took 2 or 3 minutes and ended it, went back to the dressing room. He probably left the studio too.
Yeah, kind of an all business attitude. Okay. All right. So who was up next?
We had the big Canadian, man, Joe Leduc. And remember the last TV show, Dave? Joe Leduc was watching the TV championship match with the Mongolian Stomper against the Stomper was wrestling against Kevin Sullivan for the television trophy. And then when the Stomper won the match, and then after the match was over, he attacked Sullivan again. And Jerry Stubbs, who was been Kevin's partner and involved against the Mongolian team, Jerry went to the ring to get Stomper off of him. And when that happened, the Mephisto and the other Mongolian were sitting with Charlie at the set. And they just left the set and they joined the fray up there, man. And they were stomping the heck out of Sullivan and Jerry Stubbs. And Joe Leduc was standing and watching that entire match. I think Charlie asked something to Mephisto about, why is Leduc watching this? And Mephisto didn't even mention it, didn't talk about it. But anyway, Joe Leduc standing there watching, and when he went in the ring, they all left, the three of them. I mean, they had these guys down, and but obviously they had a lot of respect for Joe Leduc.
Yeah. I don't know if the fans were confused, Ron, but I wasn't sure at this point if Joe Leduc was a heel or a baby face.
Yeah, well, and that's a good question, and I think that's because we didn't really want the fans to know for sure. To be honest with you, Joe Leduc looked like a heel. If there was a wrestler that ever did, Joe Leduc looked like a heel, man. And when he came into Southeastern Knoxville in 1976, the Mongolian Stomper was ruling the territory as the Southeastern champion. We desperately needed a monster babyface because, gosh, Stomper was a monster heel, So we took a chance on Joe Leduc. He had never been a babyface in his career before. We decided we want to make a babyface out of you, Joe. And and we were hoping that we could get the fans to fall in love with him and then support him, man, because we're going to throw him in there with the Stomper. And wow, we all just saw these matches in our head as, wow, this is going to light this territory up.
Are you kidding?
And it did. I mean, it lit it up. So why not do it again, right? We got the same two guys. They've never been seen down there, the Duke at all. Stomper just very little. So why not give it another shot?
Oh, that is so cool. I mean, the stuff you're filling us in on today. So all of you were banking on that same thing happening again 500 miles to the south. Now, the only difference is different fans. But fans are fans.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. And it worked in Knoxville. It's going to work in Mobile. If it works in Mobile, it's going to work in New Orleans. Fans are fans. And, we just thought we got the guys, so we got the ideas. And we even had more than that, man. In fact, you're right. It was quite a gamble. It was a gamble. By this time, but this time we had an ace in the hole, man. We had that remarkable blockbuster angle from Knoxville, the actual angle where they busted those blocks on their head, and Joe went to the hospital and down there broke his neck, and they'd never seen it. Nobody ever in the southeastern Gulf Coast down there had seen any of this. So wow, this gamble was just beginning, man. So after fans got comfortable with him, Joe Leduc had a tremendous personality and rapport with all the fans. Fans loved him. It was crazy. You look at him and you would be scared to death of him. But when people got to know him, they were crazy about Joe Leduc. So Rob told me that Joe had been making a point every night since he got there. And this was about his second week, to spend time out talking to the fans, hoping to let them know, I'm a good guy. I'm not a monster. And, and then and he even hinted to a few of them that, I'm here for a reason, and y'all are going to find out sooner or later what it's all about. But I'm not here accidentally, basically. So on this TV, Rob pushed it to another level. He helped him greatly to become more of a babyface, in spite of the way he looked. So Rob had found this 300-pound plus wrestler. He was young. He didn't know very much, but Rob brought him in. He put a mask on. He called him the Mauler, and he put him in the ring with Joe Leduc in the second TV match. Okay, he brings in. We imported a jobber that was going to get it done.
A big one.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
So when the bell rang, Joe turned his back, and he was taking off his lumberjack suit, his shirt, his big lumberjack shirt, and this Mauler attacked him from behind, and he beat Joe down. He beat him down pretty good until Rob said, the crowd was very quiet. And then finally, he said the crowd started to kind of go, Joe, go Joe, go Joe. And wow, Joe was a great worker, man. And he knew how to work a crowd. So finally, when he got this little thing going there, then he started this comeback. Rob said, wow, what a comeback he made on this guy. He said, Ron, he slammed this 300-pound guy. He said he went up on the top rope and he jumped off in his chest. And then he said he picked him up and put him in a bear hug. Guy's just hanging there in his bear hug. So he said, for the first time, since his arrival, he said fans were actually cheering him, when he left the ring. So Charlie was, motioning then to come to the set. And Joe saw it. And so Joe went to the set, and Charlie congratulated him for the win. And he told him, he says, Joe, I need to apologize. He goes, I never really knew that much about you. And he goes, since you're out of Canada, and he says, and today I went in the control room earlier today, and they had this video of you doing these feats of strength. He goes, I'd never seen some of these things ever before. And he said, I was blown away because, so Rob said Joe just got a big, huge grin on his face, right? And he asked Charlie, he says, would you let me do something next week on the TV show? And so Charlie said, of course, what would you like to do? So Joe said, he said, I'll tell you what, he goes, I'll put these straps around my arm, a strap around my arm that attached to a rope. Mm-hmm. And he goes, then we're going to get me 20 men. I'll put 10 men on one rope. I'll put a strap on my other arm, put 10 men on that rope. He goes, then I'm going to grip my hands together, and I'm going to see if these 20 men can pull my hands apart.
Are you kidding? Okay, 20 men, 10 on each arm. Basically, it's a tug of war with this guy's body in the middle, trying to pull his hands apart.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was going to be.
Wow.
Right, so that was the challenge, and then on the next show, in the personality profile segment, we're going to be outside the studio doing a tug of war with 20 men, Joe Leduc holding his hands together, keeping them, they can't pull his hands apart.
Because literally you didn't have enough room in that studio, right?
No, you couldn't do it in the studio.
Yeah.
You got too many bodies.
Yeah.
So we're going to go outside the studio for the personality profile in the next show to have Joe do his first feat of strength.
I can't wait to hear.
Do several of these.
That is so cool. I can't wait to hear about that. All right. How about on this TV's profile?
Well, on this TV's profile was Jimmy Golden, Norvell Austin. And Norvell had started the show, and he was having to defend his title. He knew he was having to defend his title on TV. He didn't know who. He probably didn't care, right? So, and as Charlie had promised at the beginning of the show, Golden and Austin, he said, I'm going to show how you won the championship. Told Norvell that in the opening of the show. Well, Norvell didn't want him to show it because Jimmy Golden helped him win it, right? So they're both on there, and Charlie knows what the situation's going to be. So they did everything they could to keep Charlie from running the video. No, Charlie. He's the champion. That's all you need to know. They were just back and forth with him, and then when fans saw the video, they knew why they were screaming. No, we don't want to see it. We don't want to have it shown. So Tony Charles, had at the end of the match in this video, he had Norvell down, and he was about to pin him. It was about over, and Jimmy Golden arrived at the ring. And with all things, Jimmy had boxing gloves on, and he's dancing around on the floor out there, right below where Tony's standing and looking at him. Norvell's laying on the mat. He's a done man. He's out. He's done, finished. But Tony hasn't pinned him yet, and Tony's standing there looking at Jimmy Golden like, "What in the heck is wrong with you?" And So obviously it took Tony's attention away from Austin. Austin's laying there. So Golden then jumped up on the ring apron, and he took a wild swing at Tony. And Tony backed off just enough for the referee to have room to get between the two of them. And the referee got in Jimmy Golden's face, and he's telling him to get off the apron of the ring, get down. And that gave Austin a chance to get up on his feet, and he just shit. Tony's right there. He's standing behind the referee. He just jams Tony right straight into the referee, and the referee busts heads with Jimmy. Jimmy goes off into the floor, and Tony goes down, and the referee goes down, and then Jimmy finally gets back up on the apron, and Norvell reaches in his tights, and he takes out something and then puts it in Jimmy Golden's right glove, his boxing glove. And then he grabbed up Tony Charles, who's kind of getting to his feet, and he put him in a full Nelson, and he pushed him over there to Jimmy. And Jimmy let him have that right hand, man. And then, Jimmy left the ring. He left the whole ring area. He went to the dressing room. And Charles went down, bow. I don't know what was in the glove. So then Austin covers in Tony Charles, and the referee finally gets over there, and he counts him out, and there's a new United States Junior Heavyweight Champion. So studio audience erupted in boos, man. They see how they won the belt, and and while they were doing that, what was amazing, Rob said, is Ron. He says that Mobile crowd was on that video, and he goes. He said, "Do you think that didn't drown out that studio?" He said, "Wow, that 10,000 people in the building." He said they didn't like it either, right? So he said at that point, Jimmy jumped up from his profile chair. They had the big profile chairs, and each one had a chair. And Jimmy jumped out of his chair, and he started dancing around, Rob said, and shadowboxing with the fans on the bleachers, which are just right there by the set, right? Like, yeah, come on, y'all, right? So they're him and Norvell, they're happy, right? I mean, we brought the belt here, and this is a cool deal. So Charlie said, but Charlie knew what Jimmy Golden didn't know at this point. So he says, he knew what kind of match Jimmy was going to be in the next week. Jimmy didn't know who he was even wrestling at that point. So Jimmy, Charlie said, made Jimmy sit down. And then he said, I have to let you know something, Jimmy, because the Southeastern Commissioner, Don Curtis, has seen this video, right? And he said, he told me to tell you, he says, because a boxing glove was used to win a wrestling belt, and the way you guys did it, Jimmy, he says, you're going to be wearing some boxing gloves next week, and you're going to have a 10-round boxing fight with your cousin Robert Ford. Well, the studio audience, they popped, man. They loved that idea. And then Charlie turned to Norvell, and he says, and I got some news for you, Norvell. He goes, you're going to be defending your newly won United States Junior Heavyweight belt in the last match on the TV today. And he goes, your opponent's going to be Tony Charles. The profile ended with a big, huge pop, man. except Golden and Austin, they were in Charlie's face. They were mad and upset, man. This didn't turn out to be what they thought.
Wow. Another great profile. So who was in the next TV match?
Well, the new Mongolian tag champions, man. They came out of the dressing room. They had their belts on. The Mongolian Stomper was carrying his new Southeastern TV trophy that he won the week before from, and they had their manager, obviously the great Mephisto, with them, and they went into the ring.
Wait. They just got into the ring? So there was no usual charge by the Mongolian Stomper at the studio audience, and the audience freaks out?
That's what I asked Rob. I said, did Stomper do his thing? And he said, no. He said he was so proud, Ron, of that huge trophy. He goes, he figured out, how am I going to manage to charge the crowd? And I got the trophy and I got the belt. And, so he said he just got in the ring. And, that was strange. It was a different way that he normally handled TV matches. So he said the match wasn't a very long one, and the Stomper, he said, really, the Stomper was the guy that stood out, man. He was so much better than his son at this point, and so he said the Stomper really got the victory for his kid, and he said actually he ended up stomping both of the guys that he was wrestling in the face, and then he said he covered one of them, and his son came in and covered the other. So then Kevin Sullivan and Jerry Stubbs, they got a big hand from the studio audience. They went to Charlie to sit with Charlie after the match because they were in a Southeastern tag match for the belts again. And they had wrestled these guys, the Mongolians, on Thanksgiving night. And that match had ended up in a disqualification of the Mongolians. Mephisto jumped in the ring and to stop the ref and counting out his Stomper's son, and they got his team disqualified, kept them from losing the belt. So Sullivan and Stubbs were happy, man, to get another title shot. And then this time, the match was going to be a no DQ clause in it, and they expected they had a better chance of getting their belts back.
Okay, so it must have been time for the TV United States Junior Heavyweight title match between the former champion Tony Charles and the new champion, Norvell Austin.
Yeah. So, we're at last match, and that was what was promised at the beginning of the show. And so according to Rob, they had a great match. Wow. Rob said they had a tremendous match, Charles and Austin, but gosh, they probably, every time they ever wrestled, had a tremendous match. Both those guys could really wrestle. And he said it was almost 20 minutes long, and then he said, at the end of it, Tony Charles was taking control, kind of like he had done in Mobile 6 days earlier in the match. And he said Tony was about to beat Norvell, and Golden showed up at ringside again, man, to distract him, just as he did the night that, Norvell won the belt from him. So I asked Rob, I said, well, what happened? He said, the boxing gloves were sitting on the desk right there in the dressing room where I was watching the monitor. And he goes, I just grabbed the right-handed one. And he said, I put it on my hand. He said, I went to the ring. And he said, Jimmy had his back turned and he was still mouthing and jawing off for Tony Charles. And he said, I tapped him on the shoulder. When he turned around, he said, I let him have it. And so Charlie said later, he said, well, gosh, what a huge explosion in the studio that was, Ron. I mean, Rob knocked Golden out cold. And then he said Tony put Norvell into a one-legged crab, and he was about to make him give up. And Norvell hit the referee on purpose to get disqualified, to save his belt. And Rob said the end deal was, Ron, they had to carry Jimmy Golden out of the studio. He was still out.
Wow.
So he said, then a new masked man. End of the show. We're right at the very end of the show now. And, Rob said a new masked man came to the set with Charlie. He told him, my name is the Super Pro. And he said he was dressed exactly like the original Pro. White trunks, white mask, And he said the only thing, that he was here for, the masked guy, he said, you called me the Super Pro, and he goes, the only thing I'm here for is I'm going to unmask the guy that ended my father's career right here in this territory. And I'm going to, and when I do, he says, I'm going to become the one and only real pro.
Oh.
Went off the air like that.
Okay, I'm telling you, that's a tremendous TV show. So I counted 13 out of the 15 wrestlers on the next live event as being on this show. So truly amazing. So what happened in Mobile 4 days later, Wednesday, November 28th, 1979?
Well, this Super Pro, he was on the card. He got a win. It was his first night in Mobile. He beat Roy Lee Welch. And when the match was over, the Super Pro was about to leave the ring. The real pro, the wrestling pro, Leon Baxter, the living legend, man, is what they call him down there in that part of the country. Mm-hmm. He was dressed to wrestle, and he was waiting for it right outside the ring in his corner. So he said, he said, the crowd stood up. Right, there's pro, and there's this guy mouthing off about he's the Super Pro. And he said, so he said the pro shot up in the ring, and he said the Super Pro shot out on the floor and ran to the dressing room. So there's their first altercation, I guess.
Right.
So second match, Joe Leduc obviously had no problem beating Troy Graham. And we're going to change Joe's thing to make him even stronger at this point. After this match with a single guy, from now on, for a lot of matches, Joe Leduc is going to wrestle handicap. He's going to wrestle two guys at a time. So he beat Troy Graham very handily, but he's going to start wrestling two guys at a time. So in the 10-round boxing match, Rob and Jimmy had Jimmy down, man, twice in the fifth round. They got into the fifth round. Rob said he knocked him down once, and then he right at the end of the round, he said he knocked him down again, and the bell rang the second time he was down to keep him from getting counted out. So he said that Jimmy goes back, and they had chairs there, right? So they could sit down like fighters do, but they didn't have water buckets, and they didn't have the seconds and all that stuff. But he goes, as soon as this fifth round ended up, and Jimmy went back and sat down, he says, here came Norvell Austin down the ringside. He had a bucket of water, right? And he set the bucket in Jimmy Golden's corner, and then he got on the ring as if he was going to, try to get into the ring and go and sit and manage Jimmy in the corner. And the referees saying, no, and Rob said the tension's over there. Nobody's paying much attention to Jimmy while all this is going on. So while the referee and Rob's attention is on Norvell, Jimmy's over there. He stuffed his right hand glove down in that bucket of water. So Rob said when the bell rang for the next round, he goes, Norvell just walked by and he took the bucket and he went toward Rob like he was going to throw the water on him. And, the bell had rang. So Rob, instead of paying attention to where Jimmy was and what was going on, Jimmy had that water-soaked glove, and Rob said, he knocked me out. He nailed me big time, right? I did.
Wow.
Because I got counted out. Jimmy won the match. So he won the boxing match. So in the United States Junior Heavyweight title match, Norvell Austin against Tony Charles, Norvell got intentionally disqualified again to save his belt. Nobody's going to beat Tony Charles very often, I can tell you that. So, he didn't have any choice. And then in the no disqualification, for the Southeastern Tag Championship, Kevin Sullivan lost because he wasn't able to kick out of a pin because he was real close to the ropes. And normally he would have easily been able to kick out of a pin, and the referee head was up where Kevin was and wasn't paying attention. The great Mephisto reached in there and put his whole body on both of Kevin's legs. So it kept him from kicking out of the pin, and he got beat right there easily in the corner of the ring, right behind the ref's back. So Southeastern Tag title was a no DQ. There had to be a winner. And the loser was going to leave Southeastern, and the winner was Bob Armstrong.
So how about the attendance? All three of those major markets for this card, how'd you do?
Well, bear in mind that, last week in the last Studcast, we talked about how difficult the time frame it was between Thanksgiving and Christmas, being the most difficult 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the entire year for wrestling fans. And because there was so much going on and the Christmas and all that. And so this was the first of those 4 weeks during that time frame. Montgomery dropped from 4,100 the week before to 3,000. Dothan dropped from 5,300 to 42, and Mobile went from 9,700 because we were in the big building to 4,500 in Expo Hall. So that sounds like an awful lot, but believe me, man, this time of year was tough for everybody in the wrestling businesses all around and other events as well. People's thoughts and, they're interested in something else and they spend their money on Christmas. So to compare these crowds to others, I wanted to kind of get an idea. I thought, well, this is a bigger drop than I really expected was going to happen. So I got in touch with Bob Pope, who was Jim Barnett's front guy in Knoxville there. And I asked Bob, I said, what did you draw there in the Coliseum on Friday night? Same night as Dothan's night, for instance. And he said, we drew 2,200, and so that was 800 people less than Montgomery.
Yeah.
And it was 2,000 people less than Dothan. And, and it was less than half of what Mobile's crowd was.
Right.
So this 3-city total was still 12,000. It was way down from 19,000 the week before. But when you got that big auditorium and you got that ability to put all those thousands in that one building, that makes a big difference in your week. So actually, when I started looking at it, it wasn't bad. And, it was probably similar to the Florida territory in that same week. And geez, all the big cities in Florida. So, it went down, but it was still really good compared to most places in the country.
Hey, I got to tell you, this has been another outstanding Studcast, and we are going to get it. Can you believe it? Here comes a learning tree question on this episode. All right, so the question comes from, and I hope I say his last name right, Wayne Canapy or Canopy in Atlanta, Georgia. Forgive me, Wayne, if I butchered that. All right, so Wayne says, what were your expectations for Knoxville after you sold and left as far as what the new owners would be able to do there? What did you think, and I'm paraphrasing, what did you think Jim Barnett, what kind of success was he going to have?
That's a very good question, Wayne. And especially since you're a Georgia boy or Georgia man. I don't know how old you are, but you're from Georgia, right? And that's where the two buyers of the Knoxville territory happen to be operating at. So gosh, I kind of want to focus on just one of these two buyers. I want to focus this on Jim Barnett, and Jim Barnett was one of the most respected wrestling owners and promoters in the history of the sport, undoubtedly. His accomplishments in the business were absolutely legendary, and he had been actively in the business since the 1930s, and he had run at one time or another many of the major cities in America, Chicago and Los Angeles, and big, huge cities, and almost all of them he'd been extremely successful at. And his history since arriving in Atlanta, which was around 1974, had been very impressive, man. And he and I had a really good relationship. And I really, really liked Jim Barnett. I respected him, and I had worked for him in Australia in 1973. So, and I had witnessed, obviously, how he did business. And because of that, I felt like he and his partner, Fred Ward, who owned basically the southern part of Georgia, they were going to be extremely successful, I expected, in Knoxville, or they should have been. So my main questions about their potential success, though, came from the fact that they had active opposition in their main market, which was Knoxville, and that opposition was from the 5 wrestlers that had that broke away from me, and all 5 of them, all 5 of those wrestlers had been top stars at one time or another in Knoxville, and they had sadly all become renegades, baby, and I guess that's a good word for it. About totally out of control with the way they ran their company, and Barnett had not dealt with that aspect of competition. When he went to Atlanta, there was a war going on, but he bought out both sides. And when he did that, he didn't have any competition. He wasn't going to have to deal with competition. But Knoxville, the competition was still there. Those guys were still there, and those guys were focused, man, on winning the war. And worse still, if they didn't win the war, they were totally going to destroy wrestling in Knoxville. That was their thought process. If we can't own it, we're going to kill it, And I figured, that Barnett might underestimate their intentions, And it was really hard, as a wrestling businessman to understand that kind of mentality.
Yep.
Who thinks like that, right? So, and I also believe that the new owners had no idea how big so many of the top wrestlers that had come through that territory had become while they were there. Barnett and Fred Ward knew very little about what we were doing in Southeastern, So, and I often told my partners from time to time during this years, after I saw that I ultimately believed that no one was going to be able to actually save Knoxville and make it successful again, other than maybe us.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Because we had been there, for a lot of reasons. So, Wayne, if you look at the wrestlers on the Gulf Coast, in this episode alone, they were all stars there. The guys that were wrestling in this Studcast were all stars there at one time or another. And even more important, they had become unforgettable to Knoxville fans. You had Bob Armstrong, you had Joe Leduc, you had the Mongolian Stomper, you had Tanaka, you had Tony Charles, you had Jimmy Colden, Norvell Austin, Kevin Sullivan, myself and my brother. I mean, it just goes on and on. All these guys were in this Studcast. They used to be in Knoxville when it was roaring, and business was unbelievable. So I truly wish the buyers, both Barnett and Fred Ward, the best of luck. The last thing I wanted to see was a great wrestling city like Knoxville shut its doors on the sport.
Right.
So, but if wrestling ever completely died there, I really felt like that we could return and maybe bring it back to life. So, great question, Mr. Canopy, or I'm like you, Dave. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but that's a very good question, and I thank you for it.
Listen, I appreciate that answer too, because you built that territory, you nurtured it, you watched it grow, you took a tremendous amount of pride in it. So to me, that's a great answer to the question, Stud, as you didn't just let the screen door slam on your way out. So I think that's pretty cool how you saw this thing move to another owner, and you were very careful about that. The strange part about this is it's pretty much exactly what happened after you had been gone for 6 long years. I think you knocked, in this case today, I think you definitely knocked another one out of the park. So I really like the inside info. I think that is so cool how you deep dive into some of that for us on the discussion especially that you had with your partners and about where Southeastern Gulf Coast was going to be headed and the details of that exciting TV show today. That was a lot of fun. And then you guys getting together to say, let's buy homes. I mean, you're really serious about this thing. So, man, that's a lot of fun. All right, Stud. So where are we riding on the next Studcast?
Well, I was finishing up, man, pretty much everything in Knoxville at that point, and leaving basically about the next 10 days after this Studcast, 1979. And I was spending some time with friends. I made a lot of friends there and reminiscing about the good times, which there were, gosh, an awesome amount of them. And then down south, next week, we're going to be looking at another wrestler who's going to be leaving in the loser leaves match. And another all-time favorite is going to be coming back on the scene there. Joe Leduc is going to start amazing the Gulf Coast fans, man, with a couple of feats of strength that fans are going to talk about for a long, long time, man. It's amazing what he was capable of doing. He was an unbelievably strong person. Bob Armstrong is going to find himself getting rid of one monster. He got rid of one this Studcast, but he's got another one that's going to be on the horizon and going to be looking at him the next week. So, and Rob's going to be battling both Jimmy Golden and Norville Austin, and they're going to double team him again. But there's help for him on the horizon too. So, and I think our learning tree question are back, Dave. I think we're going to have time for a lot of them, hopefully, from here on. And I look forward, as always, to answering all of them.
And I think they add so much to the Studcast. Hey, folks, you know the deal. Find Ron on Facebook at Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud. Like and follow him there. Automatically become friends with a living legend. Same thing on Twitter or X. Find him at Ron Fuller Welch. Same thing. And follow him there, too. Check out the fantastic website. It's tnstud.com. TN as in Tennessee, tnstud.com. This Studcast is going to be there with every Studcast ever done. Shop the Stud store where you get 43 Super Studcast, 4 different 8x10 photos, the thrilling lion novel Brutus, personally autographed to you if you so wish, and T-shirts on special, on sale now for Christmas, only $15.99. Plus, subscribe now. Subscribe now at YouTube, Southeastern Rewind. Get the best in old school wrestling. Find 364 videos, the last 103 Studcasts, 52 Stud stories, 83 short rides with the Stud, and now 11 full Ask the Stud question and answer shows that are always so much fun. Number 11 has already set a new record and one of Ron's favorite exclusively on YouTube Southeastern Rewind. It is the best deal in old school wrestling, no doubt about it. All right, any other comments today, Ron?
Well, I want to wish everyone, obviously, a very happy Thanksgiving. And this is a time of year to begin to think of others that are less fortunate than we are. And please be careful as we travel, and may God bless us all.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, Stud. For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thanks for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.